Okay, Jason, can you tell us a little bit about how the flooring systems were developed here at the Green Garage?
Yeah, sure. Well, this building started out with being a solid poured concrete slab. And it was not a level slab. There were drainage areas in different parts of the building. And so we needed to develop a floor system that would do a couple of things. One, it would provide clearance because the majority of the heating in this building is being done with radiant flooring. So we needed to provide clearance for our radiant tubes to traverse the building from the areas where heat needed to be delivered back to our heating tanks, which is clear on the other side of the building. And so we need to provide clearance for height for those to run underneath the wood flooring, which is our final flooring, and that concrete slab that we're starting with. The other thing we had to do is develop a system that would allow us to more or less level the floors and take out all of the drainage pitches that were originally in that concrete slab, so that when we laid a uniform wood floor, it was relatively flat. And so we developed a sleeper system, and if you kind of look down here, what we did, and one other thing we needed to do, which was create an insulation barrier. So we didn't want these sleepers and everything to sit right on the concrete and allow the cold slab of the concrete to radiate into the building. And vice versa, we didn't want the heated floors we wanted the majority of that heat to be coming up into the air as opposed to losing that heat into the ground and through the slab. So what we did is we started with the original concrete floors. We've added throughout the building 2 inches of polyiso insulation. This is the top layer of the second inch here. On top of that, then we started with wood sleeper system. And for the wood sleepers, we started by ripping down all reclaimed wood, and you can see evidence of that here. There's a light board here. It's a relatively new 2x4, a cistern to a much older piece. This is all reclaimed wood from multiple sources, whether it was originally in the building, we bring it from other buildings, or other recycled sources. We ripped those into uniform sleepers that were 2 inches tall, and we laid those out across all this insulation on 16-inch centers throughout the entire 7,000 square feet of this area. We then pre-drilled all of those and used concrete anchors to anchor those down through the insulation and actually into the concrete that was originally the floor, so that we had a solid connection despite the fact that we were sitting on relatively soft insulation. Once we had those put in, we still had the issue of the fact that the floors were uneven. So we then started establishing string lines on top of those. Those string lines were straight. We would measure the difference between the height of the string and points on these sleepers, and then cut shims essentially to top those off and create a level top surface for our wood floor to attach to. Majority of the building, if you kind of scan out in the building here, you'll see majority of the building are just raw sleepers, 16 inches on center. And now to finish this area, what we'll be doing is literally taking our shiplap flooring, laying it down, laying the next course down, screwing them down, and this will be our finished floor on top of the sleepers. The only area of the building that changes is where we actually have our radiant floor heat, which is really just on the perimeter of the building. The perimeter areas of the building, like this area behind you here, we came minimum 9 feet off the exterior wall. We came back with radiant floor heating, with the exception of the west-facing wall. On the west-facing wall, because that's where the majority of the winds in Michigan come from, and that's the side of the building that takes the majority of the weather beating, we came back 20 feet on that surface. And there we actually had to set the sleepers an inch lower than the rest of the building so that we could put down an initial layer of plywood sheathing, and then on top of that we installed Uponor brand, these quick track panels. And these come from the factory. It's a system of putting in radiant floor heat. This system happens to allow for 5/16 inch tubing. And they're pre-routed. We install those down, we screw them down, and where they need to make bends and turns, they provide you with these squares that have the radius already cut out. So we start with a plan. It shows how all this needs to be routed. In this area we're in here, there are actually 3 different radiant loops. And we tie all those loops in this section back with this tubing back to a manifold box that also is buried in the floor. The stage we're at right now, we've got all the tubing in. The manifold is not yet in. The manifold will be installed next week. Our heating and cooling contractor will come in and install the manifold, and connect all these loops into that manifold on the one end so that they can heat this floor. On the other end of that manifold, these two supply pipes will be providing the hot water on one end from the tank, which is in the other room. And once it's gone through this system and the heat's been given off into the floor, the cold water, for instance, will travel back to the to the tank to be reheated and then brought back through the system again. I believe we have about 10 of these total, these manifolds throughout the building to handle different zones of the building. And that's how we're distributing all of the water. But again, you see that all of this is below the floor level, and that was another reason. Even our electrical, if you look right here, electrical was run largely on the floor, and we'll have floor outlets in place, and that's another reason we needed to have that sleeper system, so that we had basically a cavity to run all of these. We also have the advantage of having extra height here, so that in the future, as future needs dictate, we maybe need to pull electrical to one area, we have areas where we can naturally have chases to pull future wires without having to pull up big sections of the building or disturb our exterior walls, which are insulated and sealed. That's the majority of the building and how the flooring is going to go. All the hardwood here is either reclaimed ash trees. I shouldn't say reclaimed, but ash trees that have died from the ash borer disease and have been milled for us, or our oak trees, but all local sources, and were milled by and dried in a solar kiln by a gentleman we were working out of Troy.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.